Welcome to Taste Buds. I'm Debra Eckerling, goal strategist, writer, and foodie, and today I'm speaking with Michael Twitty, the culinary historian, chef, and author of Koshersoul, Rice, and the Cooking Gene. Welcome, Michael. So happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Debra. I'm glad to be here.
So, where did your love of cooking come from? Let's start there.
I grew up in a household full of adults. I was the only child, and I grew up in an extended family, and you had to entertain yourself. Everything becomes, especially back then when we didn't have, phones and tablets. You really did have to sort of like learn your way through everything. Everything had to be like a toy, a fun thing. And if you were told, don't play with that, don't do that, you still found a way to use your imagination. And so the kitchen was this laboratory. It wasn't just a kitchen. And of course, it was where my grandmother kind of babysat me a lot. My mom's most important room in the household. My father was a decent cook. Some of my uncles were decent cooks. My grandfather had his specialties. So the kitchen was a place I hung out a lot in growing up. And so it was really fun and really exciting to sort of learn my way through food. I mean, if you're going to be at the grocery store anyway for hours with the adults, you might as well find a way to make it fun. And that's a big thing that I had to learn how to do often was entertain myself as this one little kid around 8 adults. The real extended family way of living. We had a big house in DC. One of my uncles lived in the basement. My other 2 uncles lived in the main floor. My grandparents were in the upper level in the attic. My mother and I had our own room. And any visiting relative had at least 2-3 rooms to stay in. It was a big house, big old house in DC in the late 70s, early 80s. My father lived not that far away, about 15 minutes ride, the same section of the city. My paternal grandmother lived in the city as well. So I grew up with 2 of my grandmothers, my grandfather, my father, my mother, everybody, most of my uncles and aunts, and my other grandfather in South Carolina.
How did you go from experimenting and playing with food, like literally, to you? So, how did that inspire your professional culinary journey?
When I was younger, I was watching a lot of food PBS. Okay, because it was before there was a Food Network. There was, Martin Yan and Nally Dupree, and later Joe Nathan and Graham Kerr, and there was Floyd on Fish, and there was the Frugal Gourmet, and you began to have like a whole new vocabulary in terms of food and language around food. And my mother had me sit down and write down all these culinary terms. Maybe I don't know, there was 150 culinary terms. I don't know what it was in that little glossary. But I learned by the time I was 7, I knew what I it meant to chiffonade or um, what gazpacho was or all these other things. And the next goal was to learn measurements. It was horrible at math, but I could measure pretty good. And my grandmother taught me how to measure with my hands without actually using the cups, because that's how she learned how to cook. Um, and all those little pieces. And then later on, I grew up in a multicultural, non-red line community. It's so important. I think people don't understand why I emphasize the issue of systemic um, ills in our society on food, because it's very real. If you grow up in a non-red line community, the likelihood of you mixing with other people, learning about other cultures and being respectful of them, and you being forced or encouraged to teach your own culture goes up. So, I lived in a world where there were a lot of Central Americans, a lot of Southeast Asian folks, a lot of South Asian folks. Um, our neighborhoods in that part of Maryland were very Latin, very Jewish, very Black. And Black, I mean, from across the diaspora, not just African American. And it was cool to like grow up with Greek kids and Lebanese kids and Italian kids and Chinese American kids and have the entire spectrum in front of you. And so you would go over their house You would learn the customs. You would eat the food, not know what you were eating. But then you had to go look it up at the school library, right? With a card catalog. And you kind of learned your way through the globe based on the smell of someone else's house. Or, one place is beignets, one place is churros. And then sopapita and empanadas and adobo and kibbeh. And I mean, this wasn't something I learned in class. It's something I learned organically from people I grew up with. And, knowing what halal was, knowing what kashrut was. I mean, that was just basic stuff that I learned on the way. And then, of course, later I learned that you could focus on food as a subject of academic discipline. It wasn't just cooking, it was the history, the story about the people behind the food, their inspirations. And all of that really led up to me going into writing about food. I mean, I think people have this thing where, oh, there must be some school for this. No, there's not. Right now, we just barely have culinary programs that address food, gastronomy, the nature of food and human history and endeavor and thought. That's a very recent subject of inquiry. But also, most people who do food studies do food policy, food and health, access to food, food and politics. Very little is actually expanded on the things that I think a lot of people find fascinating and interesting. And it even makes people more perplexed the fact that most of us who do this, there's a secondary or tertiary career. It's not primary. Of those of us who it is primary, we had to teach ourselves and we had to swim into an academic and professional environment that we were often the grand newbies of, brand new, didn't know what we were doing, but had to learn how to deliver accurate and fulfilling scholarship according to the rules.
Well, we're both Gen Xers, and so we lived a life before internet. So basically, you educated yourself at home on TV, and now you're one of those people who's educating others. So how mind-blowing is that for you?
It's mind-blowing because, I've met all the players. I went from watching Natalie Dupree to staying in Natalie Dupree's house more than once. Wild. Joe Nathan, Rabbi Gil Marks of late, Faye Levy, Claudia Roden, Marcy Cohen Ferris. Those are my teachers in the world of Jewish food. And all of them on real time. Not like just because I read the book. And I look back on that and go, that's pretty, it's wild. How many people can say that they know, the bigwigs. I know Adina and Leah Koenig and so many other people, Michael Solomonov, who are shaping Jewish food, Jay Cohen. And it's interesting how it's not really a niche. It is the story of our people, of Yahudut and our people's relationship with food, which is very storied. But it's also beshert, a little bit of a miracle, and kind of cool. And it really does speak to what I feel is the most important element of Jewish civilization, which is the notion of mishpucha, the notion of family.
So where did all the kosher come in? When did that piece come into your story?
Oh, from the time I was very little. I mean, I was very familiar with it. I don't have an origin story as far as my Jewish identity is concerned. I like to say to people, who I became when I was formally a part of the community. I think it's been 25 years. Maintaining that is a more exciting story. I mean, we know a lot of people who go in and out of the community and they go into the community when they need it. And they exit when they feel they don't need it. That's not my narrative. My narrative is a continued relationship. And what I think has been really beautiful about the past 25 years, I tell people I've married people, I've buried people, I've signed ketubot, I've signed divorce decrees. I have, taught I don't know how many kids and brought them to the Bima across 5 different movements in Judaism, in kind of like making my own sort of brand of kashrut by way of Koshersoul, etc. I enjoy the idea of having food from different backgrounds. But I think it should be said that, like, Um, Jewish culture has been all around the world, and so has African diaspora culture. There's not a continent that's inhabited where the two groups have not made an impact. So it's like you can have access to countries and places that people don't make people's mind. Like, for example, China or South Asia, Japan. All these places have a Jewish story and an African diaspora story. And so that's why I say it's great. The doors of the entire world are open to me.
You made them. I mean, you have opened the doors. It's not just that they're available. It's, I think, because of your curiosity, but also who you are as a person, that you enjoy putting everything together.
Yeah. Because it's fun. It's fun to bring the world together. I mean, cooking by itself does not actually mean or equal unity kumbaya moment. It's the conversations that we have to have, the dialogue, the relationships that we build around the table and around cooking and around food and ingredients that tell you more about yourself and your neighbor. I love it because you can hold space for these three big things: what the food means to you, how the ingredient plays out in other cultures or dish, even a similar dish, but also its origin story that may not have anything to do with you. And so there's three parts to every food tradition that comes together. And plus, we're born with our food traditions, and we also grow up with traditions that are adjacent to us. And that's why I think this is important, because people need to understand that there is a fine line between appropriation and amplification, but also a distinction to be made between actual theft and misuse of one's platform, and the real and authentic adaptation that's done when we appreciate things and we say, okay, that's wonderful. How can I express my song, my poetry, my truth through this food or ingredient? And that's what I hope to teach people through my books and through my writings and talks.
I love that so much. Do you have a food that you think is just so central to either your origin or your continuing story that you just love?
I don't know. I mean, I know that scallions and lemons are always in my kitchen at all times. Hot pepper is always in my kitchen at all times. Although I'm not a hot pepper spicy person, like fanatic. Um, I just think that these things, I like to work in the trinities that have been given to us by so many cultures. And I think that if someone is really dutiful and studies their spices, their trinities, by trinities, I mean the two or three or more ingredients that are the very basics of every cuisine or fit in every cuisine. It could be scallion, ginger, garlic, like in Chinese cuisine, or onion, bell pepper, celery, like in Creole Cajun foodways, and so on. You know, we can think of mirepoix even, as one of those trinities. If you can master those trinities, you can essentially master translating between cuisines.
What is the trinity then for Jewish food? And I know there's so many different types.
Well, I mean, that's difficult because, of course, you're talking about multiple cultures around the world.
I knew the second the question came out of my mouth, but I had to ask it.
And the thing about it is, though, is that we have, if you're talking about the Levant, which is highly contested, right? Highly contested. We're talking about Baharat, the importance of Baharat, or the seven spices. And like I said, that's not someone stealing from somebody else. That's everybody has it. Who knows? But going back to your question, I think, for example, what would Ashkenazi food or Sephardi food be without garlic? Onion. I think onion and garlic give the food neshama. They give it a soul. But also the importance of things like celery leaves and parsnip. I mean, it just depends on where you're from and who you are. And like the goal is to, of course, you know, make it so that our we can expand Jewish food too. I mean, the beauty of it is that we are global and we have the ability to tell global stories and mix up the narrative. I mean, I'm in the process of preparing for a meal and for a group of Jews of color who are professionals from all over. So, for example, we're going to do Yemenite bone soup with knedlich.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, right. If it flows together, I think with Kosher Soul, we have people who don't know what African food is. When I say African food, it's like saying European food. Okay, everybody knows everybody. Most people know that there's Eastern European, Southern European, Western European, Northern European, Central European foodways, and of course British foodways. Kind of like is I don't know. It could be you could even call it international, whatever. But you have these 5 or 6 regional foodways in Europe, plus the fact there's a heavy influence from Africa and the Middle East and the southern part of Europe, and foodways that come across from the Silk Road in Eastern Europe, etc. So let's talk about West Africa really quick. We already know that Jewish foodways binds together the Middle East, the Mediterranean, and the different regional cuisines of Europe and beyond, even to India, even to China, even to other places, to Ethiopia, which of course is, the Horn of Africa as well. African foodways is the Horn of Africa, Eastern Africa, Northern Africa, West Africa, and it's Southern and Central Africa. And even though there are a lot of similarities between those culinary worlds, there are also a lot of significant differences. Um, a lot of West African, a lot of Central African, a lot of Black African food is composed of a starch and a soup, vegetables to go with a protein, rice, sorghum, millet, all of which are indigenous to the continent of Africa, and then legumes like um, cowpeas, things like okra, things like leafy greens, spicy foods, all make up the trajectory. So in Ethiopia, you might have injera, the traditional bread, and you eat that with dorowat, which is a stew. Whereas in Sierra Leone, you might have rice with groundnut stew, right? So again, that's that pairing. Or you have roasted meat and sauce, or roasted or steamed vegetables. Not a lot of raw food because it's the tropics, and that's part of the traditional process of weeding out foods that can make you sick. But I've been to Africa 8 times now. I've grown up with African American and African diaspora foodways from the Caribbean, Latin America, and foodways from African immigrants in the United States. And I've lived an entire life with Jewish food from challah to kibbeh. So being able to translate across those cultural lines is really important for me. It makes me feel whole. It makes me feel like a complete person who is on a journey of self-discovery every time I go into the kitchen. I jokingly call it Afro Ashkefardi, but I mean, it does. It's certain things that make absolute sense. Why not have groundnut stew, but also do knedlich and have a Senegalese chicken stew? Why not have matzo meal fried chicken? Why not have feijoada from Brazil, Afro-Brazilian culture, made with pastrami? Why not? It's all it's an issue of making these things feel complete. And while some people might get a little titter out of that, because it sounds kitschy, how do they think Jewish food began in the diaspora? Obviously, it comes from people looking at the food of their neighbor, eating the food of their neighbor. It comes from people converting and coming into Judaism. It comes from people who were traveling and looking and and different communities becoming, used to the ways of the world around them. And so it's like, it's not a big shock to me. It's like, this is how Jewish culture happens. And it's tied to an ancient base of Torah, of kashrut, of, of the ways that we build community and family, and the way we celebrate and have hospitality with each other and for our neighbor.
And I would think, for the future of food, it's only going to become even more combined as people
Right.
discover and grow communities.
It's our duty to really sort of have an understanding that we don't just make food, food makes us.
I completely agree. Do you have a recipe that I don't want to say is definitive of who you are because you are so many yous?
I think I'm probably going to go with the Koshersoul rolls from Koshersoul. I mean, I really want to give people a portrait of what that looks like. I have a lot of menus in Koshersoul. I think I have about 60 recipes all told. And I didn't want to reinvent the wheel on everything. That was important to me. So I have a thorough bibliography, annotated bibliography, just for cookbooks and cooking. I want people to understand, it's about building up your library and coming up with your own thing, not just doing, I didn't want to create a lifestyle cookbook. Anything and everything Koshersoul. I want people to understand I'm learning from my colleagues and neighbors and friends. And I want them to do that too and figure it out for themselves. But also, everybody has their favorite cookbooks. Everybody has a Moosewood. Everybody has a Julia Child. Everybody has, Silver Palette or an Edna Lewis. So there's so many different ways to do this. And of course, now that we have vegan and vegetarian approaches to soul food, which are very easy to adjust for the kosher kitchen. And because we have halal food, which has been a big part of African American foodways for quite some time, there are all these intersections by which we can begin to create a new perspective on what Jewish food is and what soul food is, right? And Creole food. And at the bottom line, the Koshersoul rolls, I think, are the best one to really show you, there's some pastrami in there, but there's also some collard greens in there. There could be a crane in there, and there could also be hot peppers in there. So we have all the best and most savory parts of each culture in one appetizer.
Love that. Thank you. Do you have any other quick tips for cooking to really put, no pun, but kind of pun intended, your own soul into what you are preparing?
Know your ancestors as best you can, or where they came from as best you can. Also, cook with people who are different from you. It's important. You can hold space for the stranger and hold space for the ancestor in the same body and soul. That is, of course, the whole goal of the human journey in and out of this life, is to really be on an exploration and learn as much as you can about who you are, but also share that with other people and learn as much as you can about them. If the kitchen is not a cosmic space, it's a space not worth having.
I am with you on that for sure, because it's magic. It's got that power to bring people together just as much as everything else in the world has the power to try
Yes.
to tear them apart.
Yes.
So you are definitely speaking my language. Thank you so much, Michael Twitty, for your time and your background and all this wonderful food for thought. Where can people learn more about you and follow you?
So I'm the Cooking Gene on Threads and Instagram. I also have a site called Culinary, which I try my best. It doesn't almost not always successful at making sure people know where I am. I'm Michael W. Twitty on Facebook. So yeah, I'm all over the place. And of course, I would love people to support and buy Koshersoul. I will say this quick plug. Unfortunately, I've had between the Kanye situation and this year's Matzav, I have also dealt with my own personal share of anti-Semitism, and that people don't want my narrative outside of its bubble. So I'm asking people to please support Kosher Soul. Please buy it for gifts for people. Please support that, because guess what? If my work does well and I can mentor other people, that means we'll have more narratives from Jews of color. Kosher Soul is not just a cookbook, not just a book about food. It's a book about culture, family, relationships, and identity. And I want people to understand and know who we are, so that when we get to these arguments with the whole world about the nature of the Jewish people, our diversity, we can speak to that with authority and not from a place of tokenism. We are really an integrated, integral part of the Jewish community, and Judaism is an incredibly important central part of our lives. And I want more people to know about that, especially when it comes to African Americans like myself.
And it really calls back to where we started this conversation, is knowledge is power. And the
Right.
more you know, whether it's your ancestry or your way around a kitchen or the people around you, the more you have to offer the world.
Yes, Mipnei Darchei Shalom. It is a form of making peace in the world.
Thank you so much. I love it. We're going to leave it with that. Thank you so much, Michael Twitty, for sharing so much of your passion and your love of all things food, cooking, and community, what Taste Buds is all about, with everyone today. And thank you for tuning in to Taste Buds with Deb. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe on YouTube and or your favorite podcast platform. And you can go to jewishjournal.com/podcast to get articles that go with each episode. And you can learn more at tastebudswithdeb.com. Dig in to your background, dig into your community, and bring that to the plate, to the table. Until next time, bon appetit.